How much fun is this going to be? This is truly international. Welcome, everybody, to the Leaders Who Care series. And this is the second part of a three-part series that I'm super excited and happy to have as my co-host, Cynthia Hansen from the Innovation Foundation, who I will pass it to in a second. But first of all, why we're here is we wanted to bring people with expertise, experiences together to talk about the why, the where, the how that's going on of work. There's a lot happening there with respect to the why, the where, and how. And the Leaders Who Care series is all about recognizing people that are making an impact in areas that you can have economic. You realize you can actually have better economic impact when you also have social and or environmental impact at the same time. And certainly work is creating and enjoying, if you will, impact in that realm. So my name is Mark Sadovnik, and I'm with Fifth Element Group, managing partner of that. And we're an impact consultancy that does a lot of that work around impact and helping our clients make the most impact, and at the same time representing them as leaders who care to help them attract the talent that truly does want to make both money and have purpose to make an impact as well. So with that commercial break, I will pass it to you, Cynthia, to take it to the next step.
Great. Thank you, Mark. And so I know all of you happily, and I'm just thrilled to have you all here. So as Mark was saying, the idea here was just have an open conversation about the way things are changing in how we work, the way we work, why we work. And I thought, what better to do than assemble a group of people who are looking at bricks and mortar, what happens beyond bricks and mortar, what's changing about bricks and mortar, and then people who have totally freed themselves from bricks and mortar, and just look at what is that interplay between where we work, how we work, the quality of what we produce, how you balance that with life. And this is really to break it out beyond this idea of, is it hybrid, is it not? It's just completely different. And looking at how we merge those elements rather than trying to create some kind of artificial distance between them. So that's why I thought all of you have a different take on this. You're all fabulous people who have a lot to say. And so I'd like to invite each of you just to introduce yourself, not something long, just who you are, a little bit about where you're working, and maybe something that keeps you up at night. So Ben, would you like to kick it off?
Thank you, Cynthia. I'm an architect. I'm from South Africa and now based in Switzerland. So I've worked in the industry about 20 years, working with various different cultures and different sort of clients in amongst Africa and Europe. So this subject is very interesting from a perspective of how we create society and spaces and places around community and how actually people work together. So I'm interested in the physical space. That's my main interest, but something that's also evolved more recently in the last 3 to 4 years, if I should say, thanks to COVID, is this whole interaction in virtual space. So this is where a lot of interactions around bringing people together in virtual space are also something that I'm deep diving in. So that's a little bit of who I am and where I'm from.
Thank you. Nassim.
Oh, that he didn't talk about what's keeping him up at night.
Yeah, what keeps you up at night?
Do we have to go into that? No. Keeping me up at night. The one thing that is concerning in this space for me is the fact that I heard literally, Thursday last week, when I hear like Facebook, for example, is about to, pay 181 million to get out of a contract to bring people around work. When I see big technology companies driving change, and then I see the ex-minister of Greece who was around during the sort of austerity period of Greece, Yanis, I forget his surname because I'm going to absolutely butcher it and I'd rather not go there. He's just released a book called Techno-Feudalism. And I think these topics around technology are also influencing this space, and a lot of people are driving change from a much higher level than on a ground level. And I wish people would have a bit more freedom of choice around this. So that's what's keeping me up at night.
I love that, the top down, bottom up, human centric pace. Nassim.
My name is Nassima Sefi. I'm a physician by training. I'm an internist and women's health specialist. I also do global health, public health work. And because of my geographic promiscuity, I've diversified my gig work. And I have also worked on content curation for TED Talks and TED Med. And I'm a novelist and activist on the side, and also a single mother. I'm Iranian American, born and raised in the States, but currently live in North Africa in Rabat, Morocco. And what's keeping me up at night is the lives of other people on the move, such as refugees and migrants, and those who have to move because of climate change, who aren't as privileged as I am, who willfully wants to be on the move, but can work from anywhere that has internet, and as long as I have my computer. And I worry about these people, and I hope to improve their lives by improving their health and their access to health.
That's great. I also love the geographical promiscuity.
You should trademark that. That's an amazing term. Michael, over to you.
I'm Michael Lindenmeyer, and I'm on faculty at Northwestern University. I'm an independent consultant who works primarily in the area of health and education, and also the future of work, an area that I care a lot about, like what are we going to do and be. And I, prior to that, have been an entrepreneur and also worked in a big building. I worked at Morgan Stanley, so I have done all the different evolutions of the kind of places you can work. And I love what you said, Cynthia, which is I think there are new narratives being written. And when I think about what keeps me awake at night, it's actually the possibilities of these new ways of doing things. So I have a very vivid dreamscape, and often in that dreamscape, interesting sort of ideas or threads about what's coming and what's possible actually fill my mind. So when I think about that, like, it literally keeps me awake at night, because I'm like, wow, that's amazing. And then I make sure I jot it down somewhere in the night. And of course, how do these, possibilities also address those who have the biggest challenges and the most need? So that's what keeps me awake. And that's also what makes me really excited to take on another day.
I love that.
It's awesome. It reminds me of when we used to look for jobs years ago, and we said, well, I'd like to work in that place. The building's beautiful, which was crazy.
That's the perfect opener. So I would love to know what you all think about the interplay between the kind of work we do and where we do it, because so much of that has changed. If you think about being able to do surgery remotely, or design a building that you'll never visit, or that, how much does work really have to be related to where we are? Who would like to go?
I would argue it doesn't.
Go ahead, Ben, please.
Battle it out.
Rock,
I would
paper,
argue it
scissors, shoot.
doesn't. I think we're so interconnected nowadays, and that there's so many discussions happening on so many multiple levels, that on one side, open discussions are had, and we're sort of evolving around the whole place idea. And I think society generally kicks back, and I think that's what we've learned from the pandemic. People want to have certain freedoms, and I've sort of seen a lot based around the work-life balance, what is a fluid lifestyle culture, and all these sort of things. And I think it's also generational, if I'm pretty honest as well. I notice people of a certain generation want to feel comfort in a certain place and space. Others want a bit more freedom. What I do fear is that with all the migration and movement of people, we have lost our connection to place physically as well. And I think that also we can't lose sight of the fact, in architectural sense, that does build a structure. It builds society. So my fear is on maybe we're breaking down that society at the same time as moving. If I would throw that into the pot right now, I'm very curious to see how we could riff off that one.
Michael, you had something to say.
I'd love to hear Nassim, and then I would love
Sure.
to
Yeah.
for sure.
I've been working, freely from all over the world for the last 17 years. And what that's meant is that I can no longer primarily be a clinician. One, because I don't enjoy telemedicine, and two, because even now, post-pandemic, which had relaxed the telemedicine laws, you still have to be in the country to practice, even if you can practice across state lines. So my desire to work and travel around the world has meant that I have changed my work to fit that lifestyle. And then throughout the 17 years, I have sometimes popped back in during COVID, for instance. I was a full-time primary care and COVID doctor on an Indian reservation in Washington State. And that's where I was really place-based. Currently, I work for a couple of health tech startups, and I do that in North Africa. So I am living in Morocco. My child is going to a Moroccan school. You know, our day-to-day life is in the built space of Morocco, but I have nothing to do with Morocco work-wise. And part of that is that I'm working on the language so that I can at least volunteer. It's not my goal to be completely geographically independent, because what I've learned over the last 17 years is, while I'm much more efficient working on my own schedule, and I really appreciate as a single mother being there for my kid and having flexible hours, I actually find it's more fun to work in the presence of others and to gather in a particular space. But I prioritize other factors over that joy of working synchronously and in the same built space.
That's great.
I think of place beyond the building. So I actually think that where you work is incredibly impactful on like how you work. So, you know, I think about beauty and wonder, or really being in a place, like if I'm working on a particularly challenging issue, then being present, you know, not just as an interloper, but spending really quality time. And so one thing I've always encouraged friends who want to explore this kind of nomadic or semi-nomadic lifestyle is to make sure wherever you are, actually get involved, even down to the really local level. I lived in northern Utah, and the first week we lived in that place, I went to the local planning commission meetings, and this was fascinating because it was like 7 people. And somehow I was there because it was at an inhumane hour, and I'm already an early riser, but there we were. And it was in that setting that I realized that actually, wow, it's just a very few people who are laying the framework for the rest of the people who actually live here. And I found that to be the same almost everywhere I've been. So I've always thought, like, if you really want to participate, whatever that means for you, whether that's culturally or planning or whatever the thing may be, you know, even just be a guest at it, even if you're not a local citizen. They often welcome you as an outside view, or if they don't, then you really get a sense of like what they don't like, and that then informs your work. So I began to have the sensibility about how people in different places have differences, but also commonalities, and that I think makes like the work skill or experience ever more vibrant.
Yeah, that's brilliant. If I can jump in for a second, Cynthia, when I was visiting my 95-and-a-half-year-old aunt in Montreal, she said to me, first she said, I don't understand where 95 years went by, which was profound in itself, if you think about it, because logically we know, but but she said it was so nice when we all lived together in the same town, going to Ben's point about that community. And at the same token, talking to leaders of companies, they have a bigger pool of talent to go after when the persons don't have to be close to the office, and they could get maybe better people, quote unquote, because they're wherever they are, and the experiences that we get rather than just being in our own town. So that balance it's an interesting conversation, obviously, that we're having about that balance. How do you get the experiences and knowledge and cultures and whatnot, being so many places like all of us have had the opportunity to be, and at the same time go to the boring local commission meeting that's going on. Not always
boring. Not boring.
not always boring.
Just early.
Early, okay. and being part of a community. And there's a thing going on in the States. I don't know if it's there. It's about loneliness of single men right now, who for all sorts of reasons are having mental health issues there. So just wanted to insert that point.
This is great. Actually, it's something that we've been looking at a lot at the Innovation Foundation as well, about also then who is afforded that luxury of being able to be part of that global pool and get a job anywhere and work from anywhere. And then the whole issue of, say, frontline workers, and where can frontline workers afford to live, and can they afford to live near where they work? And things like that, I think, are really interesting, because in kind of the broader narrative, a lot of what you hear is about the hybrid working and the teleworking, and there are pitfalls to that as well, because you get into absenteeism and the whole issue of who is thought of for stretch assignments or for promotion, things like that. But then there's this whole other side of it that isn't talked about a lot, which is who are the people who can't do jobs remotely, and are there things that we can learn from this whole rethink of how we work and where we work and why, that can be maybe more applied universally to other types of work outside of knowledge economy work. But I'd love maybe, Nassim, to hear from you on what you've seen that bleeds over or doesn't bleed over.
Thinking about the future of medicine and how much AI can do diagnosis and prescribe treatments and all of that, I think the future of medicine may be such that most of it is remotely delivered and not even necessarily human or high touch, and that only the privileged will have access to the in-person, synchronous, high touch care. And I think that might be a metaphor for other professions as well. But I see a time where working in person or being cared for in person by a human is going to become a service for the privileged.
Wow, would love to see what the knock-on effects of that are. If you look at things like the studies around babies and skin contact and things, what happens? What do you lose in that? Thoughts on what we could potentially lose?
It brings to mind, I don't know if you've heard the work around blue zones. It's been something been investigating the last 20 years. And actually, it's a very great documentary. It's just been released on Netflix, I think, in the last month or so.
Yep.
And the thing very telling in all that study for me is the social contact and around cultures and skill sets related to food, community, and then arts and crafts. People doing things with their hands. And then I look at my own case, where I have an architectural studio. We have 5 staff. We went through COVID. We all had to go through the distancing thing. And for economic reasons, the 3 members of my staff who live sort of in northern Italy preferred, for their own personal reasons connected to their family, because a lot of them are caregiving to their parents, because we can't lose sight of that. About in our European context, we do have this aging population. We do have the boomers coming through. So there's a lot now around care for older people, which played directly into our situation as well. We decided not to renew the rent. So as of December last year, the office is remote. Everyone works from their location, Como, Ticino, Genoa, etc. And we did it because of my mother-in-law. She's 88. Her husband passed away just before COVID. She should, technically speaking, be in a third age home. But we know through statistics that as soon as you step through that door, your degeneration starts. So we were like, right, let's go back to that old Italian mentality where you sort of work on the ground floor and you live in the apartment above. The only case I have my mother-in-law living above my office. But what's been fascinating is we've integrated into our daily lives food, the lunch together, the mealtime, and the sharing of skills. So as much as certain generations want to be their freedoms, and it's generally linked to economics, because let's face it, that's why everyone's migrating. They're looking for opportunity, and it's generally related to money. I find it interesting how that the older society bought in the 30s and 40s, are very manual based. You know, our generation, 60s, 70s, and 80s, we're also very much linked to black screens and interactions through the internet. So I question what skills we're going to have when we get to that age, when we don't want to look at the screen anymore, and how much of this should be brought back into society where there's this crossover of working both. Maybe it's we're doing it with our hands anyway with digital tools, from what I'm seeing with AR, MR, and all other immersive technology. So it's a very curious time, because I think what's happening in the next 3 to 5 years, a lot of things are interchanging and moving around at the same time. So there's a lot of sort of entanglement, if you want, through aging and technology. So it's quite fascinating.
Ben, do you work like an Italian? I mean, do you take more time off or?
For sure.
Or, yeah, you do.
That's one of the reasons why I'm here. I believe in that lifestyle balance. I know that I would argue most people can't concentrate for more than 3.5 hours at a time. So it's, lunch is important. You take your time to eat. It's not what I was brought up culturally wise in South Africa. It was a 10-15 minute sandwich. Dinner is not about having the TV on. Conversation is important. Reading, and also just daily. The only thing I will say though, is the one thing I modified for myself personally was the idea of not having a hard and fast start Monday to Friday. So I work weekends. That's the one bonus I have, because I don't have children. I don't have commitments. So I get that into play. But I think this whole idea of Monday to Friday, I think this whole idea of summer holidays, I think everything around when the masses move, we're just too many people in this world that we need to readdress how we think about even daily movement, not just even holidays. And also look at the climate. I find it amazing that everyone's still going on a holiday in August when it's like 40, but you're forced to. You have no choice, because society determined that you have to take a holiday then because your children are on school leave. So
this is a nice segue, because the whole issue of kids and are they on school leave or are they not on school leave?
I'd love to hear what Michael has to say.
Fascinating. Yeah. Michael, having done the homeschool
as well as parents.
And Nassim, I can't remember if Kiana was homeschooled at some point as well.
Only mandatorily homeschooled during the pandemic, But that's not a good match for her. I know a lot of people who are global nomads like me, who are world schooling or unschooling.
As Michael has,
And I think even if I were financially independent, I wouldn't do it, because I value my own time and solitude and my own creative time. And I need that break from my kid. I adore my kid, but I need that time when she's actually in school. And also she's highly social. So she loves school. So even though I've lived in 10 countries and she's lived in 4 or 5, she's always gone to school in those countries.
What about you, Michael?
So we've tried all of the above, and I very much interact with her to see what she's into and what she wants. So she's done Montessori, she's done traditional public school. When the pandemic came in, if you can flash back to that, and it wasn't worldwide and everywhere, we were in the hot zone. So the first cases known in the United States were all but a few, less than a half a mile from our house. And so I thought, well, I can do this. I'm actually an educator. We can take this journey, and we're a multi-generational household. So we do have the mother-in-law, and she actually, by the way, this is one thing that Cynthia is working on quite a bit, is how older people have certain skills. So I just recently learned that she has world-class masonry skills. We had some masonry work we had to get done, and she was like, rocking this out. And I was like, oh my gosh, if I were to have done that individually, it would just be this horrible, it had to be sculpturally interpreted concrete because it wouldn't have looked like a stair, you know, like this is what she was able to achieve. And I was like, wow, this is just amazing that her generation has that. And then she told me about this fantastical story about how they built out their dacha and the whole community came together and they all did the masonry work together. And I was like, wow, that's just amazing, you know, and it was a community event. And at the end of the weekend, there was a dacha. Like, that's amazing. But in terms of schooling, you know, I always try to very much activate the place that we're in as the medium of learning. So we lived out in the mountain ranges and in Washington, you know, equally in the high desert, you know, in Utah and some different places. And so it's been very interesting to see how they learn. Now, when she was thinking about what she wanted to do this year, she said, you know, I would like to try this school that's around the corner. And I was like, great, go for it, you know. And now we're about 3 weeks in, and I said, okay, what's the debrief? And she herself laid out what she likes about the current school and what she misses about world schooling. And she, you know, and I said, like, well, you know, at any given time, whatever you want to do, I'm fine with, because whether it's on or off ramping, it's fine by me. I think the biggest challenge is portability of educational credentialing. And really the only way you can enter and exit these things is by testing, of which is an anathema to me, because I'm like, you know, now I have to educate her to a test, when I think like that's training for the past. Like, there's no meat computer on earth that can outcompete a supercomputer today. So Nassim's talking about the future of AI, right? Like, I think maybe we should be, you know, when AI first came out, I let Kara play with all the tools, Midjourney and all the rest, to see like what would she do without almost any instruction, minus if you encounter something horrible, let's not look at that, you know, with as much parental, you know, help as I could do with that. But it's been fascinating. So for me, because we're multi-generational, each one of us can still get a quantum of solitude that Nassim talks about, because I think it would be like probably a lot if that was a 24/7 activity. But for me, I also incorporated like what Ben talked about, like blue zone activities. So like fitness wasn't PE, it was let's go for a hike. Oh, and by the way, we learned about biology and, you know, botany along the way, and then we came back. You know, all these kinds of things basically made it so that whatever I also wanted to be able to achieve during that time, we could do together. So she was learning, and then of course you go get the standard rules that they're supposed to know, you know, math, reading, writing at whatever level. And I also didn't put any constraints on her, like, you know, like if you want to read as far as you want or less, up to you. So world schooling, mixed matched, you know, it's like mixed martial arts, open to all of it, as long as she's a good human being and getting educated.
So a couple of things I wanted to add to that. So with my experiences, my two younger sons were brought to LA for acting, and they went through homeschool, they went through special schools for athletes and actors, and then they also wanted to go back to regular public school for the experiences that were there. So to, I think, Ben's point about choice or freedom, I think you said that, Ben. It was really important where they feel more comfortable. The other things that we're finding a lot is about work is when parents come home. This is the whole family thing. When parents come home, there's two things that happen. They say, "Oh man, I'm tired. Work sucked. My boss didn't even notice I was there." Da, da, da. And the kids hear that. Or the parents come home and say, "Guys, you got to get together over dinner. I want to tell you what happened at work today. That was really amazing." And the kids hear that. And one thing we're finding for both the kids and older people is that it's a great thing to go into an office for all the experiences they get, from meeting the CEO by accident in the elevator that gets stuck and the CEO gets to know you or something like that. All these variables are happening. And the last thing I want to interject, it's a bigger discussion, is we're all somewhat privileged to do what we're talking about. And you talked about frontline workers and everything, Cynthia. There's a lot of people that don't have the choice of any of that. The kids have to go to school because they have to go to work. Then the healthcare, there's a whole bunch of things that we can get into, but there's a lot of skills training that some of our clients have now that makes college not required to have dignity in life and make money and do good things et cetera, et cetera. So that's also a big part of the puzzle.
And then you get something like Switzerland that has, the really healthy, totally socially integrated apprenticeship program as well. And the message there that college is not for everyone. You don't need a university degree to be successful, and whatever definition you want of success, I think is fascinating. And lots of other countries are looking at how you do that. And one of the biggest barriers is cultural, usually. It's about cultural acceptance.
And running more from that, they also in Switzerland have this whole thing about civil service. They still have military, but it's more of a civil service to the population. And then they have a level below that. And then I come from completely opposite, where the only way forward was to get a university education. So everybody goes and does a Bachelor of Commerce. So you get this entire influx of people in this bracket above who actually don't have a clue. They just know they need the piece of paper, and they just push through the system, like sort of going through a meat grinder. And you have this very sort of loose arrangement at the bottom of sort of empty space. And what generally happened, a lot of us left, you have a brain drain effect, which is counterintuitive. And then likewise, you don't have the people that weren't afforded the privilege of coming through a exclusive private education system being able to get through that, because there's this barrier where they're blocked. And I find that interesting. In South Africa now, they're sort of investigating education through mobile phones, using education systems that are linked to sort of the idea of interaction, which comes from the sort of mobile banking idea and a lot of other interactions around microbank. How can we micro-educate? How can we bring more people into this interface so we make it a lot more democratic?
And that's a key word there, democratic, because there's a lot of discrimination about, you didn't go to college, well, whatever, or you didn't go to this college, then I'm not going to talk to you, or whatnot, which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
I do want to circle back on something you said, Mark, which is, I would say that there are a couple of things that struck me about your comment. One was when you come home and then you have that interaction with your kid. I think everyone should have deceleration zones, whether you have kids or not. So you've worked, have whatever that deceleration zone is, and then engage with the people in your life. If it's 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever it is. That way, the people you encounter aren't a garbage dump for whatever bad you might have had for the day. And they also might not get swept up because they don't know what you're saying is out of context, right? So either way, you build a sort of a narrative for them, and you get a chance to slightly recharge. The other thing is, I often wonder, could workplaces, well designed, the Bens of the world, like he's working on this amazing project right now, make you net positive? You come home healthier and better and smarter for having gone to the workplace, versus I was sucked dry and now I'm a dead prune and let's do your homework and it's time to go to bed. That's a horrible narrative. So if people want people at work, they should be like, this place is amazing. So it's up to them to really redesign. I mean, design works, right? You want horrible lighting, then people are going to feel terrible. You want great lighting, great music, good air systems, awesome furniture. I should literally feel better by the time I get home because I've spent so many hours in this place, right? So I think that it's up to the Bens of the world to keep making this ever more amazing, and the Cynthias and yourself, Mark, Nassim, to, make this just a place you really want to be.
I need
How
to
are you designing workplaces with doctors?
But yes, agreed. But have one other thing. You go to architecture school, 101 is very simple. Work is north, or where there is diffuse light. I have yet to find an office that abides to that principle and also offers natural ventilation, because then the next thing is we're all into saving energy. So we have passive houses, so we block everything, so the air is circulated. So we're not getting sufficient enough light. We're not getting significant enough ventilation, and let's not even get into the glare off the screen. So just those two things need to be.
Are we glowing from the radiation we're getting right now?
Then you don't need light.
We had an individual.
I was going to say, does working remotely allow you to work less in front of the computer? Personally, I only work for pay, because that's another thing. How do we even define work necessarily? But I do a lot of work-like things that don't necessarily get compensated in financially, but I'm maybe working 2 or 3 hours a day, and the rest of the time I'm walking. My daughter and I walk home from school at 70 minutes, and we do that every day. So I think we're going to start thinking about work. What is work? And it might not come down to what is compensated financially or not. It might have to do with meaning, or providing service, or learning.
Value to community, right? You know,
Right.
there's a video documentary that was done years ago called The Corporation. You can get it on YouTube. It's a long documentary, but the main gist of it was you could only become a corporation if you showed what public good you were doing. You weren't allowed to do any M&A without permission, et cetera, et cetera. That was how corporates started. And then we turned it into corporates are persons, and executives can get away with whatever they want to do because they're not liable. And it's about quarterly reporting and money and all that, but good one to watch what corporates were supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. And as we live longer, like maybe we're going to live in these blue zones, or maybe we're going to adopt the lessons of the blue zones. You know, are we going to just stop working because we're 65 or 70? I mean, I plan to never stop working. I actually love my work, and it gives me energy. For me, retirement means working and not paying attention to if or how much I get paid. That's all it means.
Which is a luxury.
What is success, and the defining of what's enough, right, as well in your life as a person. And I think that's also quite interesting, because that then follows on to make that choice of only working 2 or 3 hours, making it effective time and not being efficient. I think there's a lot of questions need to be answered around that.
Mm-hmm. I'm not saying I'm lying on the couch, you know, the other 10 hours. I'm studying Arabic 6 hours a day. I'm volunteering, I'm gardening, I'm walking, you know, I'm a part of a variety of volunteer groups. But the actual health tech consulting, that's only 2 to 3 hours a day.
How many people are effective 9 to 5 anyway, or 8 to 6? I don't even know what the hours are. I mean, the studies that I've read is most people lose concentration and they're already on their 3rd coffee, and they're not. If you put these limitations on people, what are you actually getting in return?
This is only my 2nd cup, all right, Ben?
You're in different time zones, so that's okay.
Yeah.
I do want to circle back to a question that Cynthia put out earlier, which is, what about for people who are from different socioeconomic backgrounds?
Right.
And one thing that has struck me being back in the US, because we've lived in many different places, and I don't know the context for every place, but this is certainly the case here, is that this is a huge physical space with loads of small, medium-sized towns that have a lot of the baseline infrastructure you need, that have had some reason that they've, you know, faded out of their peak times. And one big area of opportunity are entrepreneurial immigrants. You know, these towns come alive again when you do that. I'll give you an example, a very crazy, awesome example. There's an area outside of Detroit. I met my uncle for a bite to eat. And this is 2 brothers from Iraq. They're immigrants. They were, you know, refugees from the war period. And they set up this awesome restaurant during COVID. Like, a bunch of people couldn't come to work, but they still remained open and people wanted to go and to the restaurant. And so they were one of the first restaurants, if not the first restaurant, to have robot servers moving around that could take your order and deliver it and clear your tray for you. And then, as you know, people have returned, they now are mixed and match, and they don't see any difference. So the robots are still there because they own them, but it's allowed them actually just to serve more people because there's still an insufficient number of people who are there. And what I drove them, because I asked them about this, was this 1st generation immigrant energy. Like we had to find a way. We don't find a way, we are done, and like we had to scrape our families together. So they did family finance. And so I think there's like such an amplitude of opportunities like this in the US. I actually very much welcome that. And I would then layer on what Ben talks about is, what if you could on-ramp and do like civil service? Like if everyone's so like, oh, immigrants are such a challenge. Well, what if there was such a benefit in your mind, right? They are, but like if you could rewrite that as civic opportunity, I think it'd be really interesting. And they have different sets of skills, and go back to what Nassim talked about, which is this very human dynamic. They might have an AI doctor, they might even have a robot that's serving it, but maybe they have other things that are like, that are very human that they're interacting with, or they are getting skilled up in these places. So I actually think that it's going to be very interesting if you could give entrepreneurial skills plus some kind of microfinancing plus kind of, digital upskilling, to help the people who don't necessarily, have the maximum means to be able to create entrepreneurial and employment opportunities. I'm excited about that.
Michael, there are companies right now that, for example, one of our clients is working with hundreds of thousands of formerly incarcerated people and are educating them in prison and then outside and stuff like that. So there are opportunities like that. And I agree 1,000,000%. I do want to add though, robots, there's a company here in Orange County that they do massages. They have real people that do massages, and they also have robots that do massages, whichever you prefer, which is interesting, especially during COVID.
Do they have statistics about what people prefer?
Well, they did interview some people, and some people don't like to be touched, especially during COVID, but even otherwise, and the whole robot remembers everything it did. It's important in the massage. And yet some people just don't feel it's the same feel of having a robot giving you a massage. I guess like anything, it's a choice. It depends, but it's fascinating. But a lot of what you're saying there, Michael, is right on. And the exciting thing I see is that AI can really help healthcare. We're doing a lot in that regard too, but you can still get the personal touch for that. And I think we're moving towards allowing a lot of people not to be discriminated against if they didn't go to college, and they could take a skill set in cyber or caregiving. There's a huge deficiency of caregivers out there right now. So many things that can happen in that regard.
Yeah, like one of the things that Nassim was talking about is, what would one consider work, like learning as an opportunity. So I have a lot of friends who work with people who are refugees. And there's about 60 to 80 million. I don't have the exact number at this precise moment, but many of them, unfortunately, spend over a decade in some kind of refugee camp. But imagine
19 years, actually.
Yeah,
like 19 years, they're
19
stuck
years.
on average before
years.
they get to their adopted country.
Now, imagine if you made every refugee camp have the same level of excellence, perceived excellence, as like a top tier university. You could learn whatever you want, like 19 years, right? That's essentially what we do to kids that are going, kindergarten through 12th, right? So if you were to come out, hopefully you could shorten that cycle. But imagine if you were suddenly doing literally a surge of learning, that's there. And you had a portability of an ID, like a universal, thing, then people would be competing for that talent. Because I don't know of many places where you're hemmed in, underneath those circumstances. But if you came out, you could potentially be one of the most educated humans on earth. So I think that when you think about
that's actually
the future, that would be an incredible opportunity.
That's actually in the works. I'm taking it where even on borders, having these camps on borders, supply them education, so maybe they wouldn't even have to migrate somewhere else. They can actually bring that home or whatnot. It's a brilliant idea, and it's needed. I think it's a great solution.
I think though it's limited for a reason. I mean, the best work on this I've read is by Parag Khanna on Move. I mean, the whole history around immigration and migration. We are, all of us, 2 or 3 generations back, an immigrant or a migrant. I think, I look at what's coming through, if people want to jump on a boat and go across the Med, they obviously have a very, very valid reason. They're scared, they want to move. If we could integrate them, I mean, the whole industry in Europe is crying out for a lot of labor and a lot of assistance in the bottom area. The States is the same. You know, these societies that we're living in 100 years ago, they were built by immigrants. I mean, that's why you travel to Sofia, Lisbon, you go to any major European city, you will find a Chinatown, you will find the Jewish district, you will find, if you go to Lisbon now, the African, the Lebanese, the whole community around it.
Yeah.
We're not opening ourselves to it because we're trying to block borders, trying to protect our territory. And it's just going to get to a point where you're just going to get, in my opinion, completely overloaded.
I think it's the narrative, back to what Cynthia often talks about. If people understood people of talent at all levels, not just what they call these high talent visas, just all levels, right, as a talented pool, then of course you would be like, wow, I'd really love those people here. Like, I don't know a single place that doesn't have a sign up that says, looking for talent. This is like everywhere. And then you would say, well, at the same time, right, you know, you have people who are like, stay out wherever that may be, you know. And I think to myself, like, wow, this is such a strange phenomena, given that, as you just said, Ben, everyone's from somewhere at some point. So I think it's a narrative issue. You know, if you really understood, it doesn't mean that there aren't bad apples everywhere.
Context, a local story to our context where I live, you know, you go back sort of 110 years. There was a particular gentleman here called a certain Mr. Gatti, and he left because he was desperate and he needed to earn. So he went to Paris, like all Tichinese immigrants at the time, because this was a very poor, destitute area of Switzerland. You know, there was numerous diseases, malnutrition, the works, goes to Paris, learns what the restaurant cafe industry is like, gets an opportunity to go to London, starts hobnobbing around, literally buying products and then selling them on the trains and the trams in London for a marked up price. This allows him to draw some cash together to open a restaurant. He opens a very small site. This thing evolves. This guy's son becomes the mayor of London. And what he develops is a restaurant on Piccadilly Circus, which is called Gatti, Gatti's Restaurant. And he incorporates in his whole culture of bringing anyone from Ticino, from this area that speaks his language, because it is language. There's a lot is around immigration, is language and identity. Where they come through him, they learn from him. He is a place of refuge in London. It's an understanding. We connect with each other. And then he took it one stage further. Once they'd worked or got themselves settled, they were in the restaurant for 2 or 3 years, he then taught them the skills and then assisted them in opening their own businesses. So they went to open a grocery store, a restaurant, a bar, or whatever. And I think these opportunities are there. It's just that they need to be allowed, and obviously certain personalities need to come in and sort of activate it and build these communities around, because they're all mobile in some way or another. They're all connected via certain synapses. You know, we talk about digital now, but then it was sort of letters and words that were passed down the grapevine.
Exactly.
That's a perfect segue, actually, into a last
Sorry.
question, which is, in what way do you think we could give people more agency about how they work and where they work? Starting with Nassim.
I would say, be really rigorous about your hiring process and then trust people. And there is some work, especially creative collaborative work, maybe Ben would know this better than me, but medicine is also a team sport in many ways. There's some work that's just better done in person, and maybe you reserve the synchronous, geographically proximate work for that creative, collaborative, team-based work, but then you trust people to be their best selves and to be their most efficient selves and just do the work and look at their outcomes. It doesn't matter how many hours they spend if they're meeting the outcomes that you set.
Or how many keys they pressed on the computer that day to measure it. Right.
Exactly. Ben, your thoughts?
I assume it's trust based. I think you've got to let certain people free. There's obviously, you've got to be in a position to also be able to pull them back in a way. So it's that kind of being little magnetic, sort of bringing them to you, but at the same time letting them go. I also identify being a creator and working with creatives that, you know, most of my team, they do their best work sometimes between midnight and 5 a.m. You know, Dad, if that's the way you work, you work. You know, I'm looking for the best out of you. Yeah. One thing we do have intrinsically in our is architecture and creativity is around projects. So we are project driven. So we work on deadlines. So there's not a case of how and when. It's just that unfortunately that's the date it's got to be done by. So there are milestones, there are points to activate. So that also draws a certain point of focus, which I think is useful and very, very handy. But I've also realized them in the 20 years I've been into it, it's got nothing to do with how many qualifications you got. It's got nothing to do with how many degrees. I'm interested in smart people, not intelligent people. I'm interested in people that are critically questioning and are creatively curious. And my best people that I have worked with ever in my life have never got more than a high school. They've all gone and taught themselves something. They've all gone and that's what I love about what's happening right now in software in our industry, is there are so many tools now. Yes, you need a computer screen. Yes, you need the internet, but you can actually go out there and actually teach yourself.
Yeah, you can.
30 years ago as an architect, you had to be on a drawing board, you had to have all that, and you were limited, and then we got software that allowed you to teach yourself CAD so that the individual architect could become somebody. It's becoming more and more democratized. It's becoming more and more diverse. So you can work with anyone anyway.
Thank you. Michael.
Yeah. So I think if I stream it forward, if I think about our future selves and where we're headed, Ben talked about project-based learning. So I think that's like a really core way of having people do things. So whether that's in person, remote, hybrid, whatever the mix is, you learn how to do a series of things together. Even medicine is a project, right? Someone's sick, we're working, and a flash mob moment. I mean, if you've ever experienced healthcare, it's like a whole series of people will suddenly show up and say, here are all the things I'm going to do to you right now. And then they're gone, right? And you're like, whoa, who are all these people, right? But they need to work in concert. The second thing, I have a bias towards this. I've been a fellow at Lego for a while here, but I think the overall quotient of play should be dramatically higher throughout all of society, because play really allows you to have the skills together to keep doing something, and there's two types of games, a finite and an infinite game. And the simplest version of explaining that is a finite game is where there are defined rules, a limited number of players, and someone wins or loses. And an infinite game is there's an infinite number of players. You can change the rules together, and the only point of the game is to keep playing the game. And so when I think about this, like if we have that skill, and it takes a lot of trust, right, to play and do those kinds of things, that would then feed back into what Nassim and Ben said, because if you're intrinsically motivated to want to do something together and you trust each other, good things tend to happen.
Excellent. Mark, back to you.
After this commercial break, back to you. No, I'll let you conclude, but it's amazing what you've all talked about, and there's so many opportunities, and concentrating on the positives rather than the negatives. Again, so many opportunities. It's a matter of if we take them the right direction. So I'm super happy that you are all leaders who care, and new friends too, which is great. And hopefully we can continue this conversation and with or without deadlines, and maybe make an impact together as well. So thank you all for joining, and I'll leave the final positive word to you, Cynthia.
Thank you. What a fantastic dynamic conversation. Appreciate all of the great input. And I think that the things that came out really were about the importance of the human element and the interaction between humans and the built environment and the rest of our environment, the need to trust people. I would add in there, when we're talking about agency, there's the issue of exposure and awareness as well, because you can trust people hugely, but if they have no experience with what they could be doing, then they're missing a huge amount of that opportunity. So yeah, hugely excited to see where all of you go, what your work is. Perhaps there's something that comes out of this, and we'd love to continue the conversation. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.